Welcome to the Profit Answer Man, Seth Donlin. It's great to have you join us today.
Thanks, Rocky. I'm super excited to be here. Honored. It's a privilege.
And I'm excited to have you and enjoy the conversation. Can you share a little bit about yourself and your business?
Sure. My name, as you said, is Seth Donlin. I am when you when it boils right down. When you boil it right down to like the kind of the most simple, I am somebody that helps solopreneurs and small business owners get visibility, particularly coaches, consultants, fractional C-level execs, people that are looking to raise their presence in their industry in order to drive more business into their business. And primarily, I do that through helping my clients strategize and execute podcast guesting campaigns or tours, as I call them. But we work on a wide range of things that all ties into social media, PR, and other things. But the focus is podcast guesting.
As a podcast host, I know that works. It does. I get a good chunk of my clients come through the podcast, and I love it because when they show up on my calendar, they are ready to do business. They know who I am. They know how I think. They know how I behave. And it's funny because I was just on a I was on a sales call yesterday, and he's like, "Yeah, you sound just like you do on the podcast." I'm like, "Yeah, it's
Because
actually
it's me,
the same thing."
Right. Well, I know we're going to be talking about storytelling today, so I don't want to, go too deep down the rabbit hole. But that's the wonderful thing about being on a podcast. If you think about it, as a host, you get to talk 30, 35, 40 minutes every week with your audience, week in, week out. They're really going to get to know you. The benefit to being a guest, though, is that I get to speak for 30, 35, 40, 45 an hour, depending on the person's show, with an audience that has been curated and built over months and years by the host, where they have real trust in the host. The host introduces me as an expert in my field and somebody that they're excited to have on the show. So the audience automatically kind of trusts me and is interested in what I have to say. And I've done zero work other than the work to get myself booked on your show, right? You've done months and years of work building your audience, and I've done zero work building the audience. And I step in front of your audience and talk to, depending on the size of the show, hundreds, thousands, some shows, multiple thousands of people. And you know what? I get myself booked on 40, 50 shows a year. Next week, I'm going to be talking in front of a totally different group of 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 people. And the week after that, I'm going to be talking in front of 900 people. And the week after that, right? And so your ability to really grow your audience and speak in front of a lot of people is huge with podcast guesting. And so we'll be talking about storytelling because that's super key in capitalizing on having a podcast or being a guest on a podcast. But the ability to reach those audiences week in, week out is tremendous.
It is, but you have to do a lot of work to make it through all the pitches I get to say, yeah, I'm going to have Seth on because that's something I'm interested in learning about.
Like I said, I'm flattered to be here. I know that, not everybody gets to come on.
Yeah, we actually have a very low acceptance rate. So people don't know that, but it takes a bit to make it through. Before we get to all of that stuff, Profit First.
Sure.
You're familiar with the book?
Yeah, read the book,
and you
loved
learned
the
about
book.
it? Yeah.
Immediately started to implement it.
Okay. How's it going?
Well, there's a lot of things that are good in theory and don't execute not through fault of the system itself. The system is fantastic. And I think that if I was working with somebody like yourself who was holding my feet to the fire and keeping me to it, right, I would be a lot more successful at it. But I've certainly seen significant improvements in my financial situation, my budgeting, my ability to not always be robbing Peter to pay Paul. But that said, I think we have to admit to our weaknesses. And as a coach and somebody that really believes in coaching and really believes in constantly trying to improve myself in various aspects of my business, I do have a really hard time saying no to reinvesting in my business and reinvesting in myself. And that's where I kind of fall down, because while I set myself a budget for okay, this is what I can spend on coaching and consultants and stuff this quarter, I often kind of let that be more fluid, right, than it should, which cuts into what I can pay myself. So,
I am guilty of the same, but I've learned to have a little bit of control. And that
yeah,
literally that one of the biggest things we do is create accountability. And they have to ask me first when they have to break into the profit account, or they know I'm going to know what's in the account. And so actually, one of the clients I had was phenomenal because he had that problem. And literally, he's like, I just want you here to do this. So every month we would do it. And he was so good that the moment he started working with me, he stopped doing all of that. And literally, within a couple of
I
years,
can
he was
believe it.
able to pull $1 million out of his business.
Yeah,
That was his
I can
goal.
believe it.
We achieved it. And he just needed that kind of accountability. And every month we would just, I didn't even do what I do for 99% of my clients. Like we only did a really small piece for him, but yet that was what he needed to have phenomenal success and to have tons of money. And it works. The
Mm.
system works. We all hit hiccups. You just got to push through the hiccups, and having someone to guide you through there makes it easy.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. Oddly enough, if you don't mind, I mean, we can certainly go back to profit first, but it just reminds me of a part of something that I talk about all the time in storytelling. There are times when we don't feel, for whatever reason, we don't have the confidence, we don't have the mindset, we don't have the just like we haven't put the reps in. It's hard for some people to say no, for instance, right? And so having somebody like you're saying, I've got this client, and I'm paraphrasing, and I'm sure you do more for him than this, but it's like, yeah, I've got this client, and basically all I do is hold him accountable to not overspending on coaching or whatever, right? But I'm sure he's super happy to pay you to do that because the end result is he's got all this extra money in his pocket, right? So who cares if you're not doing all the other things that you do for other clients? You're paying for yourself by keeping him from overspending on his coaching or whatever. Great. And, I have had times in my life where that was true for me. For me, the first time that I encountered it is I was about to fail out of my second college, and I was way behind on all of my work. It was, I had not yet been diagnosed with anxiety and depression and some of my neuro spiciness and things like that. And quite frankly, I was like self-medicating. I was, not in a great space. And so, but I knew I needed help. So I went in and I got this, therapist, college counselor, and she would tell me, okay, go to this professor, ask for an extension. Go to that professor, ask for extra credit. And I would say, okay, I'll go do it. But I'd leave her office saying, this is the stupidest thing in the world. That professor's just going to laugh at me. This other professor's going to kick me out of the office because I'm an adult and I should handle my own business. But the only way I could work up the courage to go and do it was to say, it's not my idea, it's her idea. So when they laugh at me, they're not actually laughing at me, they're laughing at her. And as you can all guess, they didn't laugh at me. I got the extra credit, I got the extension, and I got myself out of the hole that I dug myself. But it for the purposes of storytelling, it made me realize that sometimes we need somebody else to help us. And for many people that are getting on a stage, getting in front of a podcast, that are going to do a webinar, wherever you're going to be telling your story, that helping hand can actually be yourself in kind of an alter ego. Because I eventually learned to be that counselor for myself. I was like, well, every time she sends me to go ask something that I'm uncomfortable with, it works. So why don't I just tell myself to go ask that question? And so I built a little alter ego for myself that I was like, when they laugh at me, they're not laughing at me, they're laughing at my alter ego. But then the laughs didn't happen, right? It gave me the courage to essentially get up on stage and tell the story, right? And one of the things that I work on with a lot of my clients is that idea of, Beyonce has an alter ego that she uses to step onto stage because early in her career, she suffered from a little stage fright. Dating myself, but Bo Jackson says that he never played a down of football. His alter ego stepped onto the field for him because he needed that for him to be the Pro Bowler, at the time in the early 2000s, late 90s or whatever, the icon that he was. So the idea of you acting as this, like, you're holding your client's hand and saying, no, you can't spend the money, but that's that's what we often need. And, sometimes you need a coach or you need an alter ego or something to say, hey, you can get up on stage, you can be vulnerable, you can tell that story. It's going to be what you need in the long run, even if it's tough and scary, for you to do it right now.
Well, and I tell my clients, like, if you just got to go tell them Rocky said I can't do this. Like, you
Wait,
can use my
it's not
name. It's
me.
okay.
Right. I
Yeah.
would do it. If it was up to me, I would do
Yeah.
it. But Rocky, he won't let
Yeah.
me. He's
Sometimes
the bad guy.
sometimes they even put me on the phone call with them. I'm like, okay, we'll get on the
Yeah.
phone and we'll say no for you. I don't have a problem doing that. I can say no.
Yeah.
It's easy. I think I read that book about the alter egos, and that's what it talked about. Create your alter ego and let that part of it go do the courageous part when you need it to. And yes, you can do it
Yeah.
for
I
yourself,
mean,
or
and the reality is, unless we're suffering from some kind of, mental condition, neurological disorder or whatever, I mean, most, 99% of us are perfectly courageous at times at some point, nobody's lacking in courage completely. The key is to figure out, to build your alter ego around who you are when you're at your most courageous, when you're at your most confident, when you're at your feeling most badass about yourself. That's who you bring to the situations where you're feeling less confident, right? And that really helps in getting over the hump to sometimes the story that you need to tell is an uncomfortable story, and that's scary. But you tell that story, you come out the other side, you're going to your business is going to have been better for it. So if you need the alter ego to do that, then that's what we do. We help you build one.
and part of it though is creating the story arc. And let's just go back to the basics because I don't think a lot of business owners understand. They always sell features and
Yeah.
maybe benefits. They're not selling the story. And
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. Let's just can you start with some of the basics? I'm a business owner. I want to go sell my products and I want to create a story around it. What does that look like? And how do we think about it?
Well, that's a question that is it's that's a broad question. It's broad in scope. I could approach it from a few different directions, and I think one of the things that we have to realize is that the story is usually not about the product itself. Certainly, it's not typically about the features, right? If you think about an alarm clock. If you've come up with this great new alarm clock, you're not actually selling people a clock. You're selling people better time management. You're selling people not missing out on important appointments. You're selling people on not oversleeping, right? Like that's really what you're offering people. You're offering people the benefits that the clock is going to provide them with, not the clock itself. So, the fact that it has a really cheery face or that it has 8 different tones that are going to be melodious or whatever. I mean, that's all nice, but ultimately people aren't buying alarm clocks for melodious tones. They're buying alarm clocks because they can't afford to sleep through their alarm again and miss, and get written up at work or something like that, right? So I think that, one of the things we have to realize is what is it that we are actually selling? And that's where we start to engage the story, right? Like oatmeal isn't food, it's better health, let's say, right? Like your product isn't necessarily, like your end story isn't necessarily directly tied to the product.
When you work with entrepreneurs, business
Mm-hmm.
owners, how many of them know what they're really selling? And what I mean by that is how
Probably.
many of them are selling the drill versus the hole?
Right. Yeah, I think, well, certainly more than there should be. Hopefully if they've got a decent product and they've, that has come from understanding the market and understanding their ideal customer, their ideal client, right? And understanding what that person really needs. And if you understand the client, the customer, what they need, what their pain points are and stuff like that, then it becomes a lot easier to sell the solution to the pain point rather than the product. But there are plenty of people that don't. They just sell the product. I mean, I think about I used to work with a lot of health, sport, and fitness professionals, right? And one woman that I knew, she actually wasn't a client of mine, but one woman that I knew she worked only with postmenopausal women, right? And so it allowed her to discuss a whole range of health issues and concerns amongst those women or something that didn't have anything to do necessarily with the proper form of how you do a dumbbell curl or whatever the case may be, right? Whereas you've got other personal trainers or nutritionists or whatever they may be, and they're over here being like, you're doing the dumbbell curl wrong. It's like you're selling the wrong thing, right? You're selling the wrong thing. They're not, of course people want to do the dumbbell curl right so they don't get injured, so that they have more efficient gains or whatever. But you need to be talking to like how this is going to improve their life, not to how it's going to improve their form. Because ultimately people want to improve their life way more than they want
No,
to improve their form or lift heavier or whatever the case may be.
and I agree with you. I just find a lot of times business owners are, and I think it comes from Dane Maxwell's group. He calls them technicians. They're really good at what they do. And so they just sell that instead of
Yeah.
really the outcome. And that's kind of the distinction that's there, is how to connect on the story side. Because if you connect on the story side, there's no price comparison anymore, right? You
No.
can charge whatever you want to charge.
Well, connecting on the story side is really about, as far as I'm concerned, and I think most people are going to agree with me that focus on this thing. I mean, there's probably some that will disagree. There always are. But it's about connecting on a human level and relating with another human being. Right. So, I mean, I practice Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So I'm in my BJJ club a week or two ago. And one of our junior instructors, it's a new club to me, so I'm getting to know everybody. I've been there for a few months or whatever. And one of our junior instructors asked me to stick around after class to film. She's tuning up for a fight, and she asked me to stick around and video her while she goes into what they call the shark tank. She goes onto the mat, and every 3 minutes the bell rings. She has to stay on the mat, and just a new, not tired opponent comes in, and she has to keep fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. Right. So she wants me to just record this like half hour where she basically hardly gets a break. And so I do this for her. And afterwards, we start talking. Okay, well, what are you going to do with the film? What tools are you going to use? What, like, what are you going to do with it? One thing leads to another. And she suddenly realizes what I do for a living. And she's like, oh, we have to have lunch. I need to talk to you. I think I need to hire you. Right. Like, she didn't say, well, send me a proposal. I'm going to compare it to like 5 other people, right? She's like, oh, I know you. I've known you for a few months. We trained together. You're a good guy. You just did me a favor and recorded this thing for me. I now understand that you're selling a thing that I think that I need. You basically have first right of refusal, right? I'm coming to you first before I go to anybody else, because that's the way that we work. If our brother-in-law's a plumber, we're not going to go bid out the job to 5 million other people. We're going to go to our brother. I mean, unless we know that our brother-in-law is incompetent, but we're going to go to our brother-in-law, right? And so for storytelling in business, the point is for you to let the other person feel like they're really starting to get to know you, because if they feel like they know you, then you are going to be the first person that they think about when they need the type of services or products that you're offering. That's just the way human nature works. We keep it within the tribe or within the clan, right? And so the more that you can get people feeling like you are part of their in-group by your storytelling, the easier it is for you to start landing business.
And I agree with that. As part of the storytelling, I think people are afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah,
So how
definitely.
does that fit in a business story? Like, how do we be vulnerable in doing that?
Well, I think that the first thing to think about is, what does being vulnerable mean? And I think that there is 2 things that you need to consider when you're thinking about vulnerability. One is that there's personal and there's private, right? Not everything about you that's personal needs to be private, but private things can remain private, right? So it's like I can talk about my daughter and my wife, and I could talk about a vacation that my wife and I went on or something like that. I'm not. I don't know why I would be talking about that, but I could, and those are personal things about me. Now, my wife and my sex life is a private thing. At least I think it is. I mean, the way I hear her talking to her girlfriends, she may not feel the same way, but that's private. I'm not going to be talking about that, a podcast. And that's fine. Nobody is going to be like, Seth, you need to be talking about your sex life on the well, not on this podcast, maybe certain podcasts, but I don't go on those. The point is that just because you don't want people to know about your health scares or your something that you want to keep really private doesn't mean that you can't discuss things that are personal, which might be challenges that you've had previously in your life that you have moved past and are no longer raw for you. And that's the second thing that I think people need to understand, that struggles and challenges are great things for you to talk about, but you need to make sure that they're wounds that have healed, that you're not talking about your divorce as you're going through a divorce, because your audience is not here for you to trauma dump onto them or work through your problems with them, right? But if you learn some important things through going through this divorce, then you don't need to, but then you can talk to your audience, however you're doing that, right? Through written posts on LinkedIn, through your blog, however you're communicating your stories, you can tell those stories once you've come out the other side and once you've learned a lesson from them and once you've decided that that's a lesson that's worth telling. So those are the two things I think that you really need to think about when you think about vulnerability. But then, how do we be vulnerable? Why are we being vulnerable? Because in many instances, vulnerability is very relatable. Right. And it ultimately, that's what we want to do. We want our audience to be able to relate to us. And I think about it like, if you are in an airport bar or something and you strike up a conversation with the other person that's flying somewhere and you have a real surface level connection. But if you get stuck in that airport because the plane gets delayed and you get stuck there and you're talking to that person for a longer period of time and maybe you have a couple more drinks or whatever, if you really start to get to know that person, before long, you're probably going to start swapping some personal details. You're probably going to tell some embarrassing stories. You're probably, right? That's how people connect with each other. As you get to know people that you are starting to become friends with, you don't just go and sit down and tell somebody, let me tell you all my highlights. I won a gold medal and I made $10 million and I climbed Everest and I did this and I, defeated Goliath and blah, 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 victory after victory after victory after victory. When somebody communicates with us like that, when we leave, we turn to our friend and we're like, oh my God, that guy was just insufferable. All he did was brag about himself all day, right? But as you get to really connect with people and know people, you're like, oh my God, you're not going to believe, here's an embarrassing story that happened to me as a kid or when I was in college, or you're not going to believe the mistake that I made the other day in my business. And this is how we relate with each other, through our kind of shared vulnerabilities. That can be uncomfortable because you might think, oh, well, if I admit to a mistake in my business, then people aren't going to want to do business with me because they're going to think this person's incompetent or something. But the reality is we all make mistakes. Right? The key is, how do we recover from those mistakes and what kind of lessons did we learn from those mistakes? And are we the type of person that's empathetic enough to understand the mistakes that the other person is likely to make in their life? And these are the things that bind us together and make us think, all right, I like that guy. He's like me. I like that woman. She's like me. I want to do business. If we have an opportunity to do business, I want to do business with that person because they're the type of person that I can feel comfortable around. I want to feel comfortable with the people I'm doing business with. I think most of us do.
We do. And I'll be honest, because I've always been in the money space on the personal finance side and the business finance side. And on the personal finance side, it just amazed me about how many people would follow people who were utter financial failures because they're like, oh, he failed just like me. I'm going to listen to him. I'm like, but he screwed up. Why would you listen to him? And yet they do. And I'm like, all right, I don't get it. Along these lines, I think a lot of business owners struggle with, what are the stories of my daily life that I should share that my audience isn't just going to tune out of? How do we pick the story that works?
Well, that's a really good question. And it, like many things, if you want to get good at it, it's something that you have to practice. And so one of the things that I do with my clients, it's one of the main exercises I do with my clients, is I teach them to keep a story journal, which means keep it on paper, Keep it in a Excel spreadsheet, Google Doc, whatever, however you want to keep it, doesn't matter. Point is at the end of the day, or if you find time throughout the day, you're recording the little story ideas that you have throughout the day, because we all have them. All right. If you're working in an office, you go out to have lunch and you come back and you see one of your coworkers, or you pick up your phone and you call your friend or your spouse, and you're not going to believe what I saw while I was out getting lunch, or you're not going to believe what happened to me, or the story I heard in line while I was waiting for my burger, or whatever the case is. And you've got a story. Is it an earth-shaking story? Is it Jocko Willink talking about leading all the SEALs in Iraq during Desert Storm? Like, no, it's not that type of story. It's not about summiting Mount Everest in record time or something like that. But we tell little stories. Oh my God, I almost got hit on the commute into, somebody was driving like a maniac, and like whatever. We have little stories that we tell. So I call them story seeds. You write down broken sentences, doesn't have to be complete sentences. You're not writing a story. You're just writing the facts that would help you to recall whatever that story is. And in doing that every day, you've got one, or you've got two, or you've got three. Maybe some days you forget and you don't put any down. You get this long list of your story seeds. Then you sit down at some point, yourself, your VA, some colleagues, just yourself in ChatGPT, whatever, and you come up with a whole bunch of things that you might want to communicate about. Here's 5 tips for this. Here's an important lesson that you have to know. Here's a mistake that I made in my business when I was just starting out. Here's whatever the stories are that you're going to tell, the points that you're going to make. Not the stories, but the points that you're going to make. And then what you have to do is figure out how to tie those things together, right? And if you look at this list of 30 story ideas and 30 topics that you're going to be writing about, you might see that some just so very clearly align, and you're like, okay, great. Well, then I'm going to tie story seed 8 to lesson 4, and I'll be able to tell a little story this story idea pairs perfectly with my business. Sometimes that happens. Most of the time it doesn't work that well, but what you do is you record the story seeds, and you don't worry about whether they work or not. You just keep recording them, and then you use that as a well to draw ideas from. And then the second step of that exercise is that what I do is I have my clients every week use a random number generator, pick randomly one story seed and one topic. And you're now forced to try to teach that topic via the story in the story seed. And most of the time it doesn't work. You get this really clunky piece of writing or whatever, this really clunky piece of storytelling, but it's like a professional baseball player being in the batting cage. You're going to foul off a bunch of pitches as you're perfecting your swing, right? And so the more and more you do that, the better and better you get at tying these ideas together, and the easier it becomes for you to spot the ones that really fit together well. You just have to be comfortable with writing some stinkers. It's like a stand-up comedian, super famous stand-up comedian. When they're getting ready for a new tour, they go out to like tiny little clubs and work on their material, because they know that some of the material is going to hit and some of the material is going to stink. And they do that on small stages. If they didn't allow themselves to go out on the small stages and try things that might not work, their end product would be no good, right? So you just have to get comfortable trying stories that are probably going to fail, because that's the way that you get to the ones that ultimately are real home runs that really win.
And I don't think most people realize all the comedians, that's literally what they do. Seinfeld tells 100 bad jokes till he finds the one that works. And then that's what they focus on, is then refining it, or taking ones that are half good and just playing with them and improving them. And it literally comes down to practice. And the more you practice, the better you get. But you got to put the reps and the sets in.
Yeah, and
Little
there
by
are
little,
ways.
it comes together.
Yeah, there are ways to speed it up. Like I've actually created a custom GPT around that very process that I just explained to you. And what it does is you can give it the story seed, you give it the lesson that you're wanting to teach, and you give it the kind of so a little bit of detail around it, kind of what tone you want to set, what's the end goal of the lesson that you're trying to teach, that type of thing. And then this custom GPT that I've made will spit out 3 different versions coming at it from different kind of a different angle for each version, but it'll come out with 3 different versions of its best attempt to fit those 2 things together into something that's coherent. And the idea behind that isn't that you then take what it's, okay, I'm taking number 2 and there's my story. But the idea is that, I've been doing this not with the GPT, but I've been doing this for years and I'm pretty damn good at it. People are often surprised how I manage to take 2 seemingly unrelated things and I'm like, no, I see how they connect. They connect this way, and then I tell the story, right? But there are times when I will intentionally pick things that I just can't see any connection to at all. And as I started developing this tool, I put it in there and it would come up with, the stories would be really clunky, but it would think of it in a way that I just wasn't thinking of it. And it would use like a word or a phrase, and that word or phrase would unlock in my mind, and I'd say, they do connect. They connect through that word, or they connect through that phase, or through that phrase, excuse me, not phase. And then I could take that thinking that I unlocked in my head and craft the story. And so it's a useful tool for just kind of iterating and iterating and iterating and getting somebody else's, somebody else, it's AI, but somebody else's thinking onto connecting these disparate things. And it can be really helpful in coming up with some creative and entertaining story ideas.
And I'm a big fan of AI. It is not going to give you the perfect answer, but what it's going to
No.
do is get you from 0 to 50 or 0 to 80. And then all you got to do is polish. And if you can
Right.
do that, you're way ahead of the game. And it helps you get out of being stuck. So if you're not sure what stories to tell, you can literally throw your story banks in there and say, hey, help me craft some stories. And the
Right.
more it learns you and the way you want your stories done, the better it's going to get at giving you stories in your own word.
Yeah, I think that it can be in it. For me, it's a great editor, right? I'll write whatever the copy is, a LinkedIn post, web copy, whatever, and then I feed it into, I've got a finished product, and I'll feed it into Chat GPT or Claude or whatever we're using, and get its feedback. Now, I'm confident enough in my writing that I know what I've created, what I've written is good, but we all have blind spots, and it's like, okay, well, you could tighten up this area, or here's like swap these order of these things, or whatever the case might be. And then, I can take it or leave it. I don't have to accept its feedback. And I don't always, right? But I don't think I've ever fed anything into ChatGPT where the feedback that it's given me, I've universally dismissed it. There's always something in there that I'm like, you're right, that is better. I'm not proud. If the AI can help me make my writing better, I'm going to take the AI's example. But I wouldn't ask the AI to write something for me. At least I wouldn't ask it to write something for me that I wasn't going to heavily edit afterwards. It's got my tone. I've fed it enough of my writing that it can write pretty close to the way that I write. Sounds like me, but it just doesn't always quite hit it right. Even though the language use, the cadence, the phrasing and stuff like that is pretty hard to tell that it wasn't me. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of using AI in writing and storytelling, because I think it can make you tighter. Look, if you're working at an agency and you're surrounded by a bunch of other really great writers and you can workshop your stuff amongst your colleagues, like, great. But that's not the case for most of us, right? Most of us don't have a zillion other like strong writers that we can get help from. So the AI is really useful in that instance.
It very much is. And again, it's like you said, it's a tool. It helps you move faster. And I think the way I'm looking at it right now is those people who are moving forward with AI are going to be a couple steps ahead of those who aren't. You can have a bunch of great writers in the room, but those great writers are going to take 8 hours to come up with copy. Whereas AI and I can do it in minutes to an hour, not 8, which means we can create more and do more. And that, at the end of the day, leads to more profit. And that's what it's all about. Like, How do we
I
create that
mean,
efficiency?
I can turn out equally well written stuff faster now that I'm incorporating AI in my process than I could on my own. I mean, I want efficiency, so why wouldn't I incorporate that? Again, I wouldn't just sit down and I think I think that there's a lot of detractors about AI because they just don't understand how to use AI and they don't understand how to prompt AI. And they're like, AI writing is crappy. And it's like, yeah, because you probably just said, AI, write me a story about accounting, or you know what I mean? You give it
Yes.
some really simple thing and then it's going to write some super generic thing. But if you sit down and you're like, write a story about this problem aimed at this particular type of individual, here's an example, here's 3 different like real world examples that you can use. Please go and find me some statistics on this. Okay, I've double checked my statistics, use statistic 3, 5, and 6. And if you give it the right information and then say, okay, now go for it. Here's the conclusion that I want you to come to because I'm going to use this call to action at the end of my post. Write that for me. It's going to write you a really tight post, blog, whatever it is that you're asking it to write you. But if you don't give it that type of information, it's going to come up with something that's real milk toast. And of course, nobody likes that.
It treats you the way you treat it. The
Totally.
more you give it, the better you get. And it's clear as day with that. And that's
Yep.
kind of the key. At the end of the day, though, stories sell, stories increase prices, increase profits, and that's
Yep.
kind of what it's all about. If people would like help with this, like to learn more about how to work with you, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, they can go to sethdonlan.com and I always say just come to the website. All the information is there about how you can work with me on podcast guesting, on storytelling. I'd say, yeah, I should say, I don't know. I had a brain malfunction there. They should go to sethdonlan.com/Rocky. And if they go to sethdonlan.com/Rocky, then they will know everything that they need to know about how they can work with me. I've got some great every month I have a free webinar that people can come and learn a little bit about podcast guesting, learn a little bit about storytelling. I've got some great free things that they can download. I mean, there's a whole host of things, but the way to get there is to go to my website and I just say setdonlan.com/Rocky, so I know that you're coming from this podcast, and we'll get you on your path to really improving your greater profits through storytelling.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Rocky. I had a great time being here. I appreciate the invite.
Hey, thanks for listening to the entire unedited video of the Profit Answer Man podcast. You can actually get the full podcast in audio only format here on YouTube or any other of your favorite podcast players. Don't forget to go check out episodes 1 through 13. They lay out the foundation of Profit First in the book and how to get started. In addition, we've got hundreds of episodes for you to check out. And if you remember to subscribe, you'll always be updated when we put a new one out every single week. Thanks for listening. Have a profitable week.